My name is Ethan Cole, and at 39, I was the CFO of Torrin Capital, one of New York's largest investment firms. I've always been the kind of man who believed in loyalty and merit, which, ironically, made me the perfect target for a con. On that rainy Monday, I received an invitation that would change everything. A corporate weekend at the mansion of the CEO, Richard Bennett, and his wife, Claire. Richard was the kind of man who made power seem natural, cold, polished, and dangerous. Claire, on the other hand, radiated something completely opposite, a charm that seemed to envelop anyone who crossed her gaze. I'd seen that type of woman before, but never so up close, and certainly never in an environment where she was my boss's wife. That night, as I reviewed reports and calculated projections for the board, I couldn't get the invitation out of my head. Why me? There were far more influential executives who could be in that circle. It intrigued me, but it also flattered me. I didn't know I was being carefully selected, like a chess piece about to be sacrificed. We arrived at the mansion on Friday. The place looked like a palace. White columns, impeccable gardens, and silent staff. Richard greeted me with a firm handshake and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Claire appeared shortly after, in a simple black dress, but her gaze burned like a secret. During dinner, we talked about investments, mergers, and the future of the company. But while Richard droned on, I felt the light touch of Claire's foot brush mine under the table. The world seemed to stop for a second. She didn't look away. She smiled, and that's when the fall began. On Saturday, amid expensive wines and forced laughter, Claire pulled me into the garden, away from the cameras. She said she admired my integrity, that Richard respected me more than he admitted. The way she said my name, Ethan, carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The sun was setting over the lawn, and for a moment I forgot I was treading on enemy territory. When she touched my hand, I felt something dangerous, something that shouldn't happen, but that I didn't want to avoid. It was the first piece moving, and I, blind, advanced. That night she knocked on my bedroom door. She said she just wanted to talk. I should have said no. I should have closed the door. But the sound of the rain, her perfume, and what I carried in my chest made me falter. When I woke up, Claire was no longer there. There was only a wine glass on the table, and the echo of something I didn't yet know was the beginning of my destruction. Going back to work on Monday was like walking through a minefield. Every meeting, every glance from Richard felt like a test. Claire pretended not to know me. No touches, no smiles, no words beyond social conventions. It was as if nothing had happened, and at the same time, everything had changed. In the cold corridors of Torrin Capital, I realized how she knew how to move. She smiled at the right employees, praised whom she should, and with the same skill, planted subtle doubts in people. She was a natural strategist, and I, an emotionally involved idiot. The following weeks were a cycle of encrypted messages and brief encounters in Manhattan hotels. I thought I was living a secret passion, but in reality, I was being steered like an asset in a portfolio. Useful, but replaceable. One night in her apartment, Claire told me that Richard was hiding offshore accounts and using employees as straw men. She claimed I was the only one she trusted. And when she held my hand and looked into my eyes, I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. Over time, I started signing documents she said were formal, accounting adjustments, quick approvals. Nothing seemed wrong, and I wanted to prove I could protect her, even without understanding from what. It was love, or something very much like manipulation. The most ironic part is that I was always the guy who distrusted everything and everyone, Audits were my comfort zone. But Claire, she had something that bypassed any defense system. When she asked me for something, it was impossible to say no. One day she sent me a message, "Watch out for Richard. He's starting to suspect you." The phrase hit me like a sentence. I didn't know if she was warning me or preparing me. And for the first time, I felt fear. I started reviewing my reports, and I noticed some transactions were different. Altered numbers, non-existent line items, and on all of them, my digital signature. The panic came with a brutal truth. I was being used. But before I could grasp the extent of the con, something even stranger happened. An anonymous email arrived in my inbox. Subject, Pre-Nup. But first, if you like stories of clever revenge, betrayal, and power, this is the moment to subscribe and follow the next chapters. Trust me, the fall that's coming is the kind you won't want to miss. The email arrived at 3:17 a.m. I was in my office, the city outside wrapped in neon and rain. The subject said only, Pre-Nup. No sender, no signature. When I opened it, the attachment looked like a contract, the Pre-Nup agreement between Claire and Richard. I read every line, and I felt my blood run cold. There was a specific clause. In case of proven infidelity, the wife retains all assets, provided the lover can be held criminally responsible. My name wasn't there, but the dates matched our encounters perfectly. That document was a trap. And worse, the way it was worded indicated that someone was expecting exactly this, a scandal. The infidelity was the trigger for a complete destruction operation, and I was the detonator. I tried to stay calm. I grabbed the phone and called Claire. It rang and rang until it went to voicemail. I texted, "We need to talk, now." No response. In the reflection of the window glass, I saw my own panicked expression. Me, the man who calculated risks for a living, had been made a fool. Hours later, Claire showed up at the office. She walked in as if nothing had happened, a cold smile on her face. "You look tense, Ethan," she said, adjusting her hair. I showed her the email. She looked at it, feigned surprise, and lied with a naturalness that made me doubt what I myself knew. "Richard must have sent this to intimidate you." But her gaze, it betrayed something wrong. "Why would he have that contract?" I asked. Claire looked away for a second, just long enough for me to understand she knew exactly what it was about. "I protected you, Ethan. You need to trust me." And she left before I could say anything. That same day, Richard called me into his office. He seemed calmer than usual, which was even more frightening. "Ethan, some inconsistencies have arisen in the audits. Small things, but recurring. Maybe a system error," he said, watching my face. I knew it wasn't an error, and he knew I knew. I left the building with the feeling of being followed, and I was. In the parking lot, a black car tailed me for 3 blocks before disappearing. When I got home, an envelope was under the door. Inside it, a photo of Claire and me, together in a Chicago hotel. Date and time stamped. The ground vanished beneath my feet. This was no longer a case of adultery. It was a carefully planned operation. They had proof, they had the motive, and now they had the scapegoat. But amid the despair and fear, something new began to emerge. A cold, precise rage. I could run and hide, or I could turn the tables. And in that instant, I decided they wouldn't destroy me, I would destroy them both. And if you think you know what's coming next, you're wrong. Hey, before we continue, if stories of clever revenge and calculated justice grip you, subscribe now. Ethan's next move is a masterclass in manipulation and power. I spent the following days in silence, but not idle. I dug through every spreadsheet, every corporate email, every line of audit. And the deeper I dug, the more I found their trail. Richard had created a network of ghost accounts. Claire fed them with innocent approvals, mine. They weren't just betraying me emotionally, but professionally, financially, existentially. To survive, I needed to transform myself. I erased all traces of the ethical, rational man I'd been. I would now be the invisible strategist. The first step was infiltrating the internal server. I used a temporary access token that only the board had. I discovered Richard was planning to announce a billion-dollar merger the next week. If I tinkered with the right spreadsheets, I could ruin everything and make it look like he was the culprit. While piecing together my plan, Claire tried to contact me again. "We need to talk," she said, in a tone oscillating between plea and threat. We set up in a discreet cafe in Midtown. When she arrived, she wore sunglasses and the same perfume from the first night. The irony was almost poetic. "You messed with someone powerful, Ethan. Richard won't stop," she whispered. I watched her in silence. She wasn't trying to protect me. She was trying to save herself. "What if I said I could clear your name?" she offered. I smiled, cold, calculated. "I don't want to clear my name, Claire. I want his to burn." Her expression changed. For the first time, Claire seemed to feel fear. And in that instant, I realized there was something she feared more than Richard, the loss of control. I stood up, left money on the table, and walked out. Back at the office, I initiated Phase 2, the simulated leak. I programmed fake emails with anonymous senders and attached edited documents, enough to expose irregularities. I sent them to the board. The chaos would start in 48 hours. That night, Claire called me. Her voice was trembling. "What did you do, Ethan?" I hung up without answering. I knew she'd understand the silence. It was the sound of revenge beginning to breathe. 2 dawns later, the entire building was buzzing. Journalists swarmed the entrance, the market plummeted, and Richard Bennett's name blared across headlines. Torren Capital CEO under investigation for fraud. And while everyone ran in desperation, I was in my office, sipping coffee, watching the chaos I had created. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The revenge had begun, and it was only the first act. The leak exploded as I had expected. Headlines, TV calls, and packed building corridors. I felt my heart beat slowly, like watching a domino effect in slow motion. Richard looked like an ice statue, but his eyes sought my presence, like someone looking for a spark. I knew in that moment that this was bigger than I had imagined, and that they wouldn't back down, and neither would I. I'd started playing, and I was willing to win.
At noon, a reporter cornered me in the lobby with tricky questions about my relationship with Claire. I smiled, answered with the victim version that suited the moment, and thanked chance for having planted subtle proofs. Behind the cameras, though, something new was moving. Federal agents began asking discreet questions. The FBI entered the story like a shark smelling blood in the sea, silent, methodical, relentless. And I needed to control not just the public narrative, but also the cold line of the investigations. Megan, my assistant, appeared that afternoon with wide eyes and a flash drive hidden in her palm. She had found records directly linking some transfers to Richard's offshore accounts. She said she felt the ground shake when she read the names and dates. It was the proof I needed for Phase 2. I arranged a contingency plan with her, exposed what she had only if I thought it was safe. I trusted her with the same intensity that I now trusted the fear I provoked in others. While the FBI rummaged through files, I planted new clues that led the feds exactly where I wanted. I created a trail pointing to Richard's greed, without, of course, Donald, the name in the system, noticing. I manipulated logs, altered timestamps and backups, made the shadows seem taller than reality. Every move was a dangerous step in a dance with armed men and real questions. I was playing with fire, and I knew that any slip could turn everything to ashes. That night, Claire appeared at my door as if to beg for mercy. There were tear marks on her face and a voice trying to sound sincere. She said Richard was considering spilling everything and that she needed an ally. I smiled without showing teeth. It wasn't alliance I sought, it was conclusion. Not trust, but consequence. She didn't know she'd already been judged and condemned in my mind long ago. The office smelled of cold coffee and burnt paper as federal agents analyzed statements in the boardroom. One of them, Agent Ruiz, asked questions about my access to certain accounts and my relationship with the two Bennetts. I answered measuredly, with the precision of an accountant who'd learned to lie with numbers. Ruiz noticed my calm and smiled faintly. He knew there was something behind that self-control. But I smiled back and made it clear I was a victim as lost as anyone else. Megan now worked night and day, cross-referencing data and cleaning files I couldn't touch directly. She brought me an encrypted email pointing to a third person, an external consultant with privileged access. The surprise was huge because the name in the header was someone I thought neutral, and now became the key piece. I realized Richard's scheme had been bigger than we imagined. There were hidden partners in the shadows. And that meant two things: more enemies and, in equal measure, more levers for me to pull. Meanwhile, Claire vanished and reappeared in places where I knew she shouldn't be. It was as if she were trying to erase footprints I'd planted myself, which made me doubt her true intentions. At a hasty dinner, she offered me information. Richard planned to transfer assets before the FBI could freeze accounts. She said it looking at me as if begging for clemency. I heard it as an offer to close the circle of manipulation. I accepted the information and used it to open a window of time where I could act without anyone noticing. With the market's pulse beating strong, I moved the pieces that needed moving. I created an offshore account with a false identity and began tracing the route that would take $48 million to a safe harbor. Everything was meticulous: layers of shell companies, transfers and micro-installations, multiple time zones and jurisdictions. While the FBI checked the clues I'd planted, I withdrew fund by fund, like a thief cleaning the room after the heist. It was risky, illegal in the real world, but this was my story, and I chose it to be so. At the height of that week, Claire was arrested at an airport, trying to board a flight to a country without an extradition treaty. The photo of her being handcuffed appeared on every screen, and in the middle of the whirlwind, Richard left the building carrying boxes. It seemed like the end of their reign. It seemed like I'd have my full revenge. But when I checked my accounts, I felt a chill. One of the transactions had been reversed by an intercepted email. Someone had tried to anticipate me, and that meant there was an invisible hand, perhaps a traitor in my own circle. In the silence of my apartment, I stared at the walls and realized the game wasn't over yet. The revenge I'd orchestrated was starting to show its emotional bill. Faces I'd lost, truths I'd buried. But there was something I couldn't accept. I wouldn't let just any hand steal the ending of this story from me. I gathered Megan and showed her the last sequence of transfers. She pointed out a minor anomaly, almost imperceptible. It was the clue I needed to find who had tried to sabotage me, and I would find them, no matter the cost. The anomaly Megan found looked like a formatting error, but it wasn't. Within the line of code was a hidden digital signature linked to a user with administrative access. The name? A. Ruiz, the same FBI agent who had interrogated me. The blood drained from my face. The man who was supposed to investigate Richard was secretly moving part of the money. That meant my revenge was being used as cover for another crime. I paused for a moment. I'd created the chaos, but someone was feeding off it. While I planned to destroy an empire, a bigger predator hid in the system's shadows. Megan tried to convince me to hand over what we had, but I knew it would be suicide. If Ruiz was in on it, any report would fall straight into his hands before reaching justice. There was no legal outway. Only one path remained, the same one that had brought me here: play deeper. I began watching Ruiz closely, analyzing his patterns. I discovered he maintained a ghost account linked to a brokerage in Miami, used to siphon federal funds. It was genius and dirty at the same time, the kind of move only a man with power and access could make. I decided to use it to my advantage. If he wanted to use my operation, I'd use his to disappear for good. The irony didn't escape me. A criminal infiltrated in the FBI, and me, the innocent, planning to escape by robbing the thief. Megan didn't like it. She said I was crossing a line of no return. I replied the line had already been crossed the day Claire knocked on my door. I was no longer the man who believed in morals or justice, only in results. While she talked about ethics and risk, I thought in silence, "You still think we're playing the same game." But the truth is, no one played with me. I'd always been alone. I began writing reverse code, a digital trap. As soon as Ruiz moved the funds again, the system would lock and redirect the full amount to my hidden account. Everything needed to happen in less than 3 seconds, before any federal firewall noticed. It was risky, but the risk gave me clarity. With every line I typed, I felt the same chill I'd felt on the night Claire first kissed me. 2 days later, Ruiz appeared in my office with that cynical smile. "Things seem to be resolving, don't they, Mr. Cole?" he said casually. I felt like laughing. He had no idea that at that exact moment, his fortune was evaporating to a server only I knew. I replied, "Yes, Agent Ruiz, it seems the truth is finally coming out." And he smiled back, as if we'd made a silent pact. But that night, when I got home, something was wrong. The door was ajar, and inside, on the table, there was a folder. Inside it, photos of Megan and me, captured by security cameras. A note in firm handwriting: "You're not the only one who knows how to program revenge." The hunt had just switched sides. The words hit me with a weight no anonymous email had ever had. Someone knew everything, from the operation, the transfers, Ruiz, to Megan. The photos looked recent, taken from angles indicating constant surveillance. Fear came quick, but it was replaced by something more dangerous: instinct. If someone wanted to intimidate me, it was because I was too close to the truth. I called Megan and told her not to go to the office. She answered crying, saying someone had tried to break into her apartment. The security cameras were off, the Wi-Fi cut, and a black car parked out front for hours. "Don't talk to anyone, not even the police," I ordered. "We're surrounded." I hung up and began gathering what was left of the evidence. I opened the remote server to check the digital trap and froze. Ruiz's account was empty. The money had been transferred to an unknown destination with a falsified digital signature, mine. Someone had reversed my own heist, turning me into the main criminal. That someone was smart, cold, and had access to everything. It could only be Claire. My heart raced. She'd vanished, but not disappeared. She'd probably made a deal with Ruiz before being arrested, or with whoever was above him. She didn't want the money. She wanted to destroy me completely. And the most efficient way was to turn me into the villain of my own story. That night, I realized the woman I'd loved was also the final architect of my ruin. I rushed to Megan's apartment. The place was empty, but there were signs of a struggle. A broken vase, blood on the floor, and a smashed laptop. On the mirror, a message written in lipstick. She made the wrong choice. I screamed her name, but only the echo answered. That's when I understood. I wasn't just being hunted, I was being tested. I grabbed the phone and called a contact I'd sworn never to activate. Travis, ex-NSA hacker, a ghost from the digital underworld. I need to find someone who erased federal trails and left me holding the blame. Travis laughed. Sounds like you've made a professional enemy. It's gonna cost you. Money's not an issue, not now. He just said, then brace yourself, Ethan. The next move will decide if you disappear or become a legend. I hung up and looked at the window and saw my reflection. The man staring back at me was no longer the ethical director, nor the betrayed lover. It was a refined version of something between vigilante and criminal. And as the sirens echoed outside, I whispered, Claire, the game isn't over yet. It just changed rules. Unraveling the network was like pulling a thread that unwound the entire tapestry. Every server I hacked revealed another name, another shell company, another hidden digital signature. There was a central account, a node connecting transfers between Torren Capital and banks in tax havens. And at the top of that node, a name I'd never expected to read. Langford Partners, a private equity fund with direct ties to the board. The feeling was dual. Relief at finally seeing the map, and dread at knowing how vast the conspiracy was. I used the tools Travis gave me as if they were extensions of my hands. Numbed by focus, I managed to map routes, timestamps, and even internal calls indicating secret meetings. There were logs showing Claire in communications with a consultant named Graham, but Graham was a code name. When I traced the IP, it led to a server registered to a trust linked to a board member. I realized the betrayal wasn't just personal, it was structural, and the guilty used the company's name as a vault. Megan reappeared in my mind as the fragile point I needed to protect. I was sure the attack on her apartment hadn't been random, but a message. Mess with this, and someone I love pays. Travis believed she was alive, held somewhere until the price was paid. Rage became fuel. I have memories of a man who preferred reason, but now I only think of rescuing what's mine. I planned two things at once: expose Langford and find Megan before it was too late. The missing piece was turning technical evidence into a public weapon. I gathered all the transactions, fake emails, recordings, and began building a dossier that would look like an independent whistleblower report. If I could leak it to the right journalist and at the same time plant technical proofs incriminating Langford, the pendulum would swing in my favor. But I needed something to grab the market's attention, a reason for the SEC and FBI to be forced to pull the thread. The idea was born as a brilliant madness. Create a ghost merger that would expose the hidden ties when registered. Travis worked the codes and I the narratives. We created a package simulating real negotiations between Torren Capital and a Langford subsidiary. Documents, emails, and even a memo with forged signatures. It would all be plausible enough to force audits and investigations, but not so obvious as to be dismissed as a hoax.
The goal wasn't just to topple Richard, it was to destroy the cover of those above him. If it worked, Langford would burn, and the press couldn't ignore the smell of financial blood. Meanwhile, I infiltrated the bank systems hosting the offshores. Social engineering was as crucial as the lines of code. I seduced an operator with promises and a convincing photo. He gave me temporary access to the transfer dashboard, and I saw where the routes converged. That's where I could intercept the flow.
It was the final piece, turned proof into bait. I decided I needed a public ace. I sent a copy of the dossier to an investigative journalist who toppled execs in the past, a man who asked dangerous questions. At the same instant, I created a controlled leak to force Langford and the SEC to react. The spectacular play would be watching the panic spread while I pulled the strings from behind the curtains. Everything depended on timing and no one discovering I'd manipulated the documents that started the hell. On the day of the leak, I felt the adrenaline like a second heartbeat. Headlines emerged in minutes. Langford went into denial mode while investors jumped ship. Richard retreated to the background, stunned. Claire, still in prison, stared at the TV with empty eyes. And me? I breathed deep, knowing the public scene finally reflected the network I'd seen on screens. In the midst of that storm, I received an anonymous message with 3 words: "You'll be caught." It wasn't an empty threat. It was a declaration of power. Someone still controlled a resource bigger than I'd anticipated. Travis said he could trace the sender, but it would require exposure, and I couldn't afford to show up. I decided to swallow the warning as fuel. The one who thought he had the game's map might not have seen all the pieces. I closed my eyes for a second and pressed the button that would start the ghost merger. The ghost merger was the masterpiece of all my calculated risks. We created legal documents, internal memos, a fake press release, and a timeline that looked legitimate. Travis forged digital signatures. I adapted memories of meetings, and the journalist published an article that ignited the market. Langford panicked and tried to react, but reaction is delay when the chaos engine is already running. The plan required absolute silence. Any persona of mine that spoke could be traced. I used accounts with recycled identities, shell companies, and planted evidence pointing to chosen culprits. The SEC opened an investigation. The board demanded an internal probe, and Richard was quietly removed from his position. The press wanted blood. Langford tried to negotiate damages, and the market reacted with plummeting convulsions. And in the midst of it, someone erased part of the evidence we'd compiled. A signature was missing. I realized then I'd underestimated a variable. A member of my own team had an agenda. Megan, who'd been my angel and my weakness, reappeared in my mind with a facet I didn't know. She wasn't missing by chance. She was being strategically protected by whoever controlled the puppets. When the signature vanished, I knew someone had tried to remake the board to point to me as the mastermind.
I had to act fast. I sent an alternate stream, creating redundancy in the proofs and proving the merger's authenticity. Langford and Torrin Capital negotiated a settlement package to end lawsuits and protect executives. The news of the deal landed like a controlled bomb. I was called as an injured party in a negotiation no one imagined I could win. At the center of the deal was the amount, $48 million. Delivered as compensation for damages and corporate negligence. Receiving the money legally changed the nature of my victory, not a theft anymore, but a reparation the world could accept. I signed documents in the meeting room with hands that trembled slightly. Lawyers asked questions, stamps and clauses appeared like bureaucratic choreography. Publicly, I accepted the amount as reimbursement for the damages caused by Richard's conspiracy and his partners. Privately, every dollar also represented the price of years of betrayal, lies, and sleepless nights. The compensation gave me formal freedom, but left a moral trail I knew wouldn't fade. Megan appeared in the deal as a witness and something more. She looked at me with gratitude and exhaustion. The price she'd paid was immense. She said she wanted to start over, and that the money could rebuild a stolen life. I almost believed her. Almost. Still, I felt that receiving the compensation didn't cleanse me inside. It just changed the legislation in my favor. The press tried to turn the ending into a redemptive script. CFO wronged receives millions in compensation. Headlines that sounded like absolution. To the public, I was the victim who triumphed within the system. To me, it was a moral limp. I win, but carry scars no compensation pays for. And yet the amount was a tool, and I had plans to use it with surgical precision. Richard's public collapse. His fall was swift and relentless in the face of investigations and the deal that pushed him out of command. Claire remained in prison, her trial following the course the law dictates.
Langford tried to negotiate, but reputation doesn't accept being sold so easily. The game was changing rules, and I watched the board with attention. With the money in account via lawyers, I did things I wouldn't have if they'd been mine. I created trusts and legal structures to protect the capital, and at the same time, finance the search for answers. Part of the compensation was allocated to pay experts, journalists, and lawyers who could dig deeper. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to dismantle what was left of the network that nearly destroyed me. And I knew legal money brought visibility, and so I had to move with discretion. Travis helped me set up a tracking and exposure operation. I used legal resources to open parallel investigations and activate independent auditors. Every penny invested returned information. The compensation gave me the cloak of legitimacy needed to touch what once required illegality. It was a cold calculation, institutional justice with resources from the system that betrayed me. But the power of the compensation also brought unwanted eyes. Agents who'd ignored me before now wanted to know what I'd do with the funds. Politicians and private interests smelled opportunity. And in it, Richard reappeared as a shadow that wouldn't accept the end. If the law had given me money, he had extra legal means to pressure me back. One night, I received a courtesy dinner from a lawyer representing a witness protection fund. "You did well to accept the deal," he said, swirling his wine. "But the price of exposure is that not everyone wants you to reappear." The message was clear. The system protects you while you're useful to it. And I still had to decide how far I'd use the money without becoming a target for bigger interests. When I closed the door to my apartment with the amount officially mine, I felt something I didn't know how to name. Gratitude mixed with emptiness. The compensation washed away public guilt, but didn't erase what I'd felt through nights of betrayal. And I knew every decision from then on would be watched by eyes that would prefer my silence. Legal victory came with invisible chains, and I'd have to learn to walk with them. The money allowed me to buy security and hire allies. We bought files, paid experts, and created a legal network that protected our investigation. Megan wanted to use part to start over in another state. Travis received a generous compensation for his services, but vanished afterward. Every move was calculated to preserve legality and at the same time expand the search for the guilty. Richard, however, reacted in a way the law didn't foresee. He used influence and legal loopholes to maneuver allies and create legal noise. Anonymous messages resurfaced, this time less about the money and more about secrets that could come to light. The compensation hadn't erased all the motives for revenge he held,
and I realized I'd opened a window I could no longer fully close. I received a call from a representative of Dawn Logistics. The voice on the other end was calm and corporate. "You accepted what was offered," he said, "but there are contracts not resolved by checks." The line went dead. In the silence, I understood there were levels of power the compensation didn't reach. I decided to use part of the fund to support an independent journalistic investigation. The goal was clear: expose the ties between Dawn, Langford, and government members who benefited from the obscurity. If the court had given me money, the press could give me voice, and the truth could corrode their shields. I planned leaks, interviews, and undercover interviews. Megan helped coordinate, pretending seclusion while working on the plan. Claire wrote a letter from prison. She begged for clemency and blamed Richard for everything. There was something sincere in the words and something rehearsed. The compensation had changed the dynamic. Now she saw a chance for a deal, and I saw a possibility to use her confession. But any step involving Claire was a rope over a legal and moral abyss. When the journalist published the first article with the connections my team and I had pieced together, the world reacted. Investigations were reopened. Parliamentary committees convened. The price of the compensation slowly transformed into a political lever. Richard lost more than power. He lost allies. And for a brief moment, I felt the payment received had served a greater purpose. Even so, peace didn't come. Discreet messages continued arriving on my phone, reminding me there were those who'd prefer my silence. One night, a car positioned itself in front of Megan's house. There was no explicit attempt at attack, but just a warning. The compensation had become a moving target, and me the guardian of a desired resource. In the end, I had to choose between the life the compensation bought and the mission I'd been born to fulfill. I could disappear with the money and live secure in anonymity, or I could invest everything in uprooting this network that had hit far more people than me. I looked at Megan, at absent Travis, at Claire's name in documents, and felt the responsibility weigh. I chose to fight. And the compensation became the tool to transform private revenge into public reparation. When I boarded again, I didn't carry the bags of a fugitive. I carried contracts, memos, lists of journalists, and the weight of what I'd decided. The compensation had become moral and practical capital, a means to expose and try to fix the damage. I still knew that in the silence, Richard would plan his revenge, but for now, I had something I'd lacked before: legitimacy to fight. A year later, the city seemed different, but the air of power and silence was the same. Headlines about Torrin Capital and Langford Partners had become past. The scandal had diluted into new news, new crises, new distractions. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, something had changed, and I could feel it. The gears that always ground innocence had stopped for an instant. Secret funds were frozen, contracts revoked, and powerful names fell into ethics committees. Part of Dawn Logistics' network was dismantled. What started as an individual compensation transformed into a process that freed over 100 employees from false accusations. I became a symbol of corporate resistance, supreme irony considering what I'd become. People called me brave, but courage and guilt are close neighbors. Megan followed her path. using part of the compensation to open a business ethics consultancy. She said I should do the same, teach integrity after having seen hell from the inside. But integrity is a luxury I no longer pretend to possess. Sometimes I look in the mirror and see the man who destroyed an empire and rebuilt another, with laws and regrets. I still carry the echo of the voices I tried to silence within myself. Richard disappeared again, but not without a trace. There were rumors he'd made a deal with international agencies, handing over part of the network to escape prison. Others say he vanished at some border, with new documents and old secrets. The truth is, I don't want to find him, but I know one day he'll find me. Men like him don't disappear, they just change stages. Claire got a sentence reduction. She sent another letter, this one shorter. Justice is a word, not a feeling. I kept the letter in the drawer and never replied. Not out of indifference, but because I understood what she meant. The justice we won was procedural, not emotional. A cold, distant, calculated settling of accounts. The compensation still yielded fruits and discomfort. Legal money didn't erase the sleepless nights, nor the decisions made on the edge between right and wrong. I used part to create a foundation funding corporate corruption whistleblowers. I called it Glass Line, in homage to the thin line between transparency and destruction. It was my way of trying to do the right thing, albeit belatedly. Sometimes I mentally replay the moment it all began. Claire smiling at dinner, her foot touching mine under the table, the first miscalculation. If I'd said no that night, maybe I'd have continued as just an ordinary man. But then I think that without all this, I might never have seen how rotten the system is. Some truths only reveal themselves when you bleed. One afternoon, while watching the Miami sunset reflect off the buildings, I received an envelope with no sender. Inside, a single sheet, a photo of me at the foundation's door, smiling. And below, in handwritten letters, "Glass Line is a good name, Ethan. Transparency hurts." My heart raced, not from fear, but from recognition. Richard was still out there, watching, waiting, perhaps even learning from me. I breathed deep, leaned the photo against the table, and let the night wind cross the room. The cycle of revenge and justice never ends. It just changes form. Today, I don't seek to erase the past, just use it as a beacon. The compensation I received stopped being a prize and became a reminder. Everything has a cost.
And if the shadows return one day, let them know I learned to live within them.